have the rights because it did trump.
What kind of rights?
Rituals of appeasement to the animal, of thanks to the animal. Very interesting aspect here is the identity of the hunter with the animal.
I mean, after the animal
has been killed, the hunter then has to fulfill certain rites in a kind of participation mystique, a mystic participation with the animals whose death he has brought about and whose meat is to become his life. So the killing is not simply slaughter. At any rate, it's a ritual act. It's a recognition of your dependency and of the voluntary giving of this food to you by the animal who has given it. It's a beautiful thing. It turns life into a mythological experience.
The hunt becomes what?
It becomes a ritual. The hunt is a ritual.
Expressing a hope of resurrection, that the animal was food and you needed the animal to return.
And some kind of respect for the animal that was killed. That's the thing that gets me all the time in this hunting ceremonial system.
Respect for the animal.
Respect for the animal, and more than respect. I mean, that animal becomes a messenger of divine power.
And you wind up as the hunter killing the messenger.
Killing the god.
What does it do? Does it cause guilt?
Guilt is what is wiped out by the myth. It is not a personal act. You are performing the work of nature. For example, Japan, Hokkaido, northern Japan, among the Ainu people, whose principal mountain deity is the bear. When it is killed, there is a ceremony of feeding the bear, a feast of its own flesh, as though he were present, and he is present. He served his own meat for dinner, and there's a conversation between the mountain god, the bear, and the people. They say, if you will give us the privilege of entertaining you again, we'll give you the privilege of another bear sacrifice.
If the cave bear were not appeased, the animals wouldn't appear, and these primitive hunters would starve to death. So they began to perceive some kind of power on which they were dependent greater than their own.
And that's the power of the animal master. Now, when we sit down to meal, we thank God, our idea of God for having given us this. These people thank the animal.
And is this the first evidence we have of an act of worship,
yes,
of power superior to man?
Yeah.
And the animal was superior because the animal provided food.
Well, now, in contrast to our relationship to animals, so we see animals as a lower form of life, and in the Bible we're told, we're the masters and so forth. Early hunting people don't have that relationship with the animal. The animal is in many ways superior. He has powers that the human being doesn't have.
And then certain animals take on the persona, don't they? The buffalo, the raven, the eagle.
Very strongly. Well, I was up in the northwest coast back in 1932. It was a wonderful trip. And the Indians along the way were still carving totem poles. The villagers had totem poles still. And there we saw the ravens, and we saw the eagles, and we saw the animals that played roles in the myths. And they had the character, the quality of these animals, with a very intimate knowledge and friendly, neighborly relationship to these creatures. And then they killed some of them, you see. The animals had something to do with the shaping of the myths of those people, just as the buffalo for the Indians of the plain had an enormous role. They're the ones that bring the tobacco gift, the mystical pipe and all this kind of thing. It comes from a buffalo. And when the animal becomes the giver of a ritual and so forth, they do ask the animal for advice, and the animal becomes the model for how to live.
You remember the story of the buffalo's wife?
That's the basic legend of the Blackfoot tribe, and is the origin legend of their buffalo dance rituals, by which they invoke the cooperation of the animals in this play of life. When you realize the size of some of these tribal groups, to feed them required a good deal of meat. And one way of acquiring meat for the winter would be to drive a buffalo herd to stampede it over a rock cliff. Well, this story is of a Blackfoot tribe long ago, and they couldn't get the buffalo to go over the cliff. The buffalo would approach the cliff and then turn aside. So it looked as though they weren't going to have any meat for that winter. Well, the daughter of one of the houses, getting up early in the morning to draw the water for the family and so forth, looks up, and there, right above the cliff, were the buffalo. And she said, "Oh, if you only come over, I'd marry one of you." And to her surprise, they all began coming over. That was surprise number one. Surprise number two was when one of the old buffaloes, the shaman of the herd, comes and says, "All right, girlie, off we go." "Oh, no," she said. "Oh, yes," he said. "You made your promise. We've kept our side of the bargain. Look at all my relatives here dead. Off we go." Well, the family gets up in the morning and they look around and where's Minnehaha, but the father, how Indians are, he looked around and said, "She's run off with a buffalo." You could see by the footsteps. So he says, "I'm going to get her back." So puts on his walking moccasins, bow and arrow, so forth, and goes out over the plains. He's gone quite a distance when he feels he better sit down and rest. And he comes to a place that's called a buffalo wallow, where the buffalo like to come and roll around, get the lice off, and roll around in the mud. So he sits down there and is thinking what he should do now, when along comes a magpie. That's a beautiful flashing bird. And it's one of those clever birds that has shamanic qualities. Magical. And the man says to him, "Oh, beautiful bird," he said, "my daughter ran away with a buffalo. Have you seen, or you hunt around, see if you can find her out on the plains somewhere?" And the magpie says, "Well, there's a lovely girl with the buffaloes right now over there, just a bit away." Well, he said, "The man, will you go tell her that her daddy's here, her father's here at the buffalo wallow?" Magpie flies over, and the girl is there among the buffalo. They're all asleep. I don't know what she's doing, knitting or something of the kind. And the magpie comes over close to her and he says, "Your father's over at the wallow waiting for you." "Oh," she said, "this is terrible. This is dangerous. I mean, these buffalo will kill us. You tell him to wait. I'll be over. I'll try to work this out." So her buffalo husband's behind her, and he wakes up and takes off a horn. He says, "Go to the wallow and get me a drink." So she takes the horn and goes over there and says, "Father," he grabs my down and says, "Come see you." No, this is real dangerous. The whole herd, they'll be right after us. I have to work this thing out. Now let me just go back. So she gets the water and goes back, and he, fee-fi-fo thumb, I smell the blood of an Indian, that sort of thing. And she says, "No, nothing in the kind." He says, "Yes, indeed." So he gives a buffalo bellow, and they all get up, and they all do a slow buffalo dance with their tails raised, and they go over and trample that poor man to death so that he disappears entirely. He's just all broken up to pieces, all gone. The girl's crying, and her buffalo husband says, "So you're crying?" "This is my daddy." He said, "Yeah, but what about us? There are children, wives, parents, and you're crying about your daddy." Well, apparently he was a kind of sympathetic, compassionate buffalo. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you, if you can bring your daddy back to life again, I'll let you go." So she turns to the magpie and says, "See, peck around a little bit, see if you can find a bit of daddy." And the magpie does so, and he comes up finally with a vertebra, just one little bone. And the little girl says, that's plenty. Now we put this down on the ground, and she puts her blanket over it, and she sings a revivifying song, a magical song with great power. And presently, yes, there's a man under the blanket. She looks, daddy all right, but he's not breathing yet. A few more stanzas of whatever the song was, and he stands up, and the buffalo are amazed. They say, well, why don't you do this for us? We'll teach you now our buffalo dance, and when you will have killed our families, you do this dance and sing this song, we'll all be back to life again. That's the basic idea. Through the ritual, that dimension is struck which transcends temporality, and out of which life comes back into which it goes.
And it goes back to this whole idea of death, burial, and resurrection, not only for human beings,
but for the animals too.
So the story of the buffalo's wife was told to confirm the reverence.
That's right.
What happened when the white man came and slaughtered this animal of reverence?
That was a sacramental violation. In the 80s, when the buffalo hunt was undertaken,
The 1880s,
Kit
100 years
Buffalo
ago.
Bill and so forth. When I was a boy, whenever we went for sleigh rides, we had buffalo robes. Buffalo robes all over the place. This was a sacred animal. These hunters go out with repeating rifles, and then shoot down the whole herd and leave it there. They take the skin to sell, and the body's left to rot. This is a sacrilege, and it really is a sacrilege.
To turn the buffalo from a vow
To an end.
The Indians addressed the buffalo as
As a
thou,
vow.
an object of reverence.
The Indians addressed life as a vow. Trees, stones, everything else. You can address anything as a vow, and you can feel the change in your psychology as you do it. The ego that sees a thou is not the same ego that sees an it. Your whole psychology changes when you address things as an it.
Whether it's a
And when you go to war with people, the problem of the newspapers is to turn those people into its, so that they're not thous.
That was an incredible moment in the evolution of American society when the buffalo was slaughtered. That was the final exclamation point behind the destruction of the Indian civilization, because you were destroying.
Can you imagine what this experience must have been for people within 10 years to lose their environment, to lose their food supply, to lose the central object of their ritual life?
So it is in your belief that it was in this period of hunting man and woman, time of hunting man, that human beings began to sense a stirring of the mythic imagination, the wonder of things that they didn't know.
There is this burst of magnificent art and all the evidence you need of a mythic imagination in full career.
Visited some of the great painted caves.
Oh, yes.
Tell me what you remember when first you looked upon those photographs.
Well, you didn't want to leave. Here you come into an enormous chamber, like a great cathedral, with these animals painted. And they're painted with a life like the life of an ink on silk in Japanese painting. And when you realize the darkness is inconceivable, we're there with electric lights. But in a couple of instances, the concierge, the man who was showing us through, turned off the lights, and you were never in darker darkness in your life. It's like just a complete knockout of, you don't know where you are, whether you're looking north, south, east, or west. All orientation is gone, and you're in a darkness that never saw the sun. Then they turn the lights on again, and you see these gloriously painted animals. A bull that will be 20 feet long, and painted so that the haunches will be represented by a swelling in the rock. They take it account of the whole. It's incredible.
Do you ever look at these primitive art objects and think not of the art, but of the man or woman standing there painting or creating? I find that's where I speculate.
This is what hits you when you go into those caves, I can tell you that. what was in their mind when they were doing that. And that's not an easy thing to do. And how did they get up there? And how did they see anything? And what kind of light did they have? The little flashing torches, throwing flickering things, and then to get something of that grace and perfection. And with respect to the problem of beauty, is this beauty intended, or is it something that is the natural expression of a beautiful spirit? You know what I mean? When you hear a bird sing, the beauty of the bird's song, is this intentional? In what sense is it intentional? But it's the expression of the bird, the beauty of the bird's spirit, you might almost say. And I think that way very often about this art. To what degree was the intention of the artist what we would call aesthetic, or to what degree expressive, you know, and to what degree something that they simply had learned to do that way? It's a point. When a spider makes a beautiful web, the beauty comes out of the spider's nature, you know, it's instinctive beauty. And how much of the beauty of our own lives is of the beauty of being alive, and how much of it is the conscious intentional, that's a big question.
You call them temple caves. Why temple?
The temple with images and stained glass windows, cathedrals, are a landscape of the soul. You move into a world of spiritual images. That's what this is. When Jean and I, my wife and I, drove down from Paris to this part of France, we stopped off at Chartres Cathedral. There is a cathedral. When you walk into the cathedral, it's the mother womb of your spiritual life. Mother Church. All the forms around are significant of spiritual values. And the imagery is in anthropomorphic form. God with Jesus and the saints and all in human form. Then we went down to Lascaux. The images were in animal form. The form is secondary. The message is what's important.
The message of the cave?
The message of the cave is of a relationship of time to eternal powers that is somehow to be experienced in that place. Now, I tell you, when you're down in those caves, it's a strange transformation of consciousness you have. You feel this is the womb. This is the place from which life comes. And that world up there in the sun with all those things, that's a secondary world. This is primary. This is all comes.
You had that feeling?
I had it every time. Now, what were these caves used for? The speculations that are most common of scholars interested in this is that they had to do with the initiation of boys into the hunt. You go in there, it's dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's completely dark. It's cold, dank. You're banging your head on projections all the time. And it was a place of fear. And the boys were to overcome all that and go into the womb of the earth. And the shaman, or whoever it was that would be helping you through, would not be making it easy.
And then there was a release once you got into that vast torchlit chamber down there. What was the tribe? What was the tradition trying to say to the boy?
That is the womb land from which all the animals come. And the rituals down there have to do with the generation of a situation that will be propitious for the hunt. And the boys were to learn not only to hunt, but how to respect the animals, and what rituals to perform, and how in their own lives no longer to be little boys, but to be men. Because those hunts were very, very dangerous hunts, believe me. And these are the original men's right sanctuaries where the boys became no longer their mother's sons, but their father's sons.
Don't you wonder what effect this had on a boy?
Well, you can go through it today, actually, and in cultures that are still having the initiations of young boys. They give them an ordeal, a terrifying ordeal that the youngster has to survive, make a man of it, you know.
what would happen to me as a child if I went to one of these rites? As far as
Well, we know what they do in Australia. When a boy gets to be, a little bit ungovernable, one fine day, the men come in, and they're naked except for stripes of white down that have been stuck on their bodies in stripes with their men's blood. They use their own blood for gluing this on. And they're swinging the bull roarers, which are the voice of the spirits, and they come as spirits. The boy will try to take refuge with his mother. She'll pretend to try to protect him. And to take him away. And mother's no good from then on, you see. He's no longer a little boy. He's in the men's group, and then they put him really through an ordeal. These are the rites, circumcision, circumcision.
The whole purpose is to
turn him into a member of the tribe.
And a hunter.
Because
that was the way of life.
Yeah, but most important is to live according to the needs and the values of that tribe. He is initiated in a short period of time into the whole culture context of his people.
So myth relates directly to ceremony and tribal ritual. And the absence of myth can mean the end of ritual.
A ritual is the enactment of a myth. By participating in a ritual, you are participating in a myth.
And what does it mean, you think, to young boys today that we're absent these myths?
Well, the confirmation ritual is the counterpart today of these rites. As a little Catholic boy, you choose your confirmed name, the name you're going to be confirmed by, and you go up. But instead of having them scarify you, knock your teeth out and all, the bishop gives you a mild slap on the cheek. It's been reduced to that. Nothing's happened to you. The Jewish counterpart is the bar mitzvah. And whether it works actually to affect a psychological transformation, I suppose will depend on the individual case. There was no problem in these old days. The boy came out with a different body and he'd gone through something.
What about the female? I mean, most of the figures in the temple caves are male. Was this a kind of secret society for males?
It wasn't a secret society. It was that the boys had to go through it. Now, we don't know exactly what happens with the female in this period because we have very little evidence to tell us. In primary cultures today, the girl becomes a woman with her first menstruation. It happens to her. I mean, nature does it to her. And so she has undergone the transformation. And what is her initiation? Typically, it is to sit in a little hut for a certain number of days and realize what she is.
How does she do that?
She sits there. She's now a woman. And what is a woman? A woman is a vehicle of life. And life has overtaken her. She is a vehicle now of life. Woman's what it's all about. The giving of birth, giving of nourishment. She's identical with the earth goddess and her powers. And she's got to realize that about herself. The boy does not have a happening of that kind. He has to be turned into a man and voluntarily become a servant of something greater than himself. The woman becomes the vehicle of nature. The man becomes the vehicle of the society, the social order, and the social purpose.
So what happens when a society no longer embraces powerful mythology?
What we've got on our hands. As I say, if you want to find what it means not to have a society without any rituals, read the New York Times.
And you'd find,
well, the news of the day.
Wars,
young people who don't know how to behave in a civilized society. I imagine 50% of the crime is by young people in their 20s and early 30s that just behave like barbarians.
Society has provided them no rituals by which they become members.
There's been a reduction ritual. Even in the Roman Catholic Church, my God. They've translated the Mass out of the ritual language into a language that has a lot of domestic associations. So that, every time now that I read the Latin of the Mass, I get that pitch again that it's supposed to give, a language that throws you out of the field of your domesticity, you know? The altar is turned so that the priest's back is to you, and with him you address yourself outward like that. Now they turn the altar around. It was like Julia Child giving a demonstration, and it's all homey and cozy.
And they play guitar.
Listen, they've forgotten what the function of a ritual is to pinch you out, not to wrap you back in where you have been all the time.
So ritual that once conveyed an inner reality is now merely form. And that's true in the rituals of society and the personal rituals of marriage and religion.
Well, with respect to ritual, it must be kept alive. And so much of our ritual is dead. It's extremely interesting to read of the primitive elementary cultures, how the folk tales, the myths, they are transforming all the time in terms of the circumstances of those people. People move from an area where, let's say, the vegetation is the main support, out into the plains. Most of our plains Indians, in the period of the horse riding Indians, had originally been of the Mississippian culture along the Mississippi in settled dwelling towns and agriculturally based villages. And then they received the horse from the Spaniards, and it makes it possible then to venture out in the plains and handle the great hunt of the buffalo herds, you see. And the mythology transforms from vegetation to buffalo. And you can see the structure of the earlier vegetation mythologies under the mythologies of the Dakota Indians and the Pawnee Indians and the Kiowa and so forth.
You're saying that the environment shapes the story?
They respond to it, you see. But we have a tradition that comes from the first millennium BC somewhere else, and we're handling that. It has not turned over and assimilated the qualities of our culture and the new things that are possible and the new vision of the universe. It must be kept alive. The only people that can keep it alive are artists of one kind or another. That the artist is, his function is the mythologization of the environment and the world.
Artist being the poet, the musician, the author.
Exactly.
Writer.
Yes. I think we've had a couple of greats in the recent times. I think of James Joyce as such a revealer of the mysteries of growing up and becoming a human being. And for me, he and Thomas Mann were my principal gurus, you might say, as I was trying to shape my own life. I think in the visual arts, there were two men whose work seemed to be to handle mythological themes in a marvelous way. One was Paul Klee, and the other Picasso. These two men really knew what they were doing all the way, I think, and had a great versatility in their revelation.
Artists are the myth makers of our day.
The myth makers in earlier days were the counterparts of our artists.
They drew the paintings on the walls,
yes.
They performed the rituals.
There's an old romantic idea in German, das Volkdichten, that says that the poetry of the traditional cultures and the ideas come out of the folk. They do not. They come out of an elite experience, the experience of people particularly gifted, whose ears are open to the song of the universe. And they speak to the folk, and there is an answer from the folk, which is then received as an interaction. But the first impulse comes from above, not from below, in the shaping of folk traditions.
So who would have been in these early elementary cultures, as you call them, the equivalent of the poets today?
The shaman. The shaman is the person who has, in his late childhood, early could be male or female, had a overwhelming psychological experience that turns them totally inward. The whole unconscious has opened up and they've fallen into it. And it's been described many, many times, and it occurs all the way from Siberia right through the Americas down to Tierra del Fuego. It's a kind of schizophrenic crack-up, the shaman experience.
What kind of experience?
Dying and resurrecting, being on the brink of death and coming back and actually experience the death experience. People who have very deep dreams. Dream is a great source of the spirit. And then people who in the woods have had mystical encounters.
Well, let me try to be specific about it. The shaman becomes some person in a society who is drawn by experience from the normal world into the world of the gifted.
That's right.
Most of us think of shaman as a magician, but they play a much more important role than simply being a...
Oh, no, they play the role that the priesthood plays in
these are the first priests?
Well, there's a major difference, as I see it, between a shaman and a priest. A priest is a functionary of a social sort. The society worships certain deities in a certain way, and the priest becomes ordained as a functionary to carry on that ritual. And the deity to whom he is devoted is a deity that was there before he came along. The shaman's powers are symbolized in familiars, deities of his own personal experience. And his authority comes out of a psychological experience, not a social ordination. Do you understand what I mean?
And the one who had this psychological experience, this traumatic experience, this ecstasy, would become the interpreter for others of things not seen.
He would become the interpreters of a heritage of mythological life, you might say. Yeah.
And ecstasy was a part of it. They're often shamanic.
It is ecstasy.
The trance dance, for example, in the Bushman society.
Now, there's a fantastic example of something. Little Bushman groups. The whole life is one of great, great tension. The male and female sexes are, in a disciplined way, separate. The men have a certain field of concerns, their weapons, the poisons, and the hunt, and all that, and the women have a certain field of concern, the bringing up the children, the nourishing of the children, so forth and so on. Only in the dance do the two come together. And they come together this way. The women sit in a circle or a group, and they then become the center around which the men dance. And they control the dance and what goes on with the men through their own singing and beating of the thighs.
What's the significance of that the woman is controlling the dance?
Well, the woman is life, and the man is the servant of life. And during the course of this circling, it's a very tense style of movement the men have. Suddenly, that one of them will pass out. He's entranced now, and this is a description of an experience. When people sing, I dance. I enter the earth. I go in at a place like a place where people drink water. I travel a long way, very far. When I emerge, I'm already climbing. I'm climbing threads. I climb one and leave it. Then I climb another one, then I leave it, and I climb another. When you arrive at God's place, you make yourself small. You come in small to God's place. You do what you have to do there. Then you return to where everyone is. You come and come and come, and finally you enter your body again. All the people who have stayed behind are waiting for you. They fear you. You enter the earth, and you return to enter the skin of your body. And you say, that is the sound of your return to your body. Then you begin to sing. The Utum masters are there around. They take hold of your head and blow about the sides of your face. This is how you manage to be alive again. Friends, if they don't do that to you, you die. You just die and are dead. Friends, this is what it does, this tum that I do, this tum here that I dance. This is is an actual experience of transit from the earth through the realm of mythological images to God, or to the seat of power.
It becomes something of the other mind, Ellis.
It is exactly the other mind. And the way God is imaged, God is transcendent finally of anything like a name of God. As the Hindus say, beyond names and forms, beyond Namarupa, beyond names and forms. No tongue has soiled it. No word has reached it.
But Joe, can Westerners grasp this kind of mystical, trans-theological experience? It does transcend theology. It leaves theology behind. I mean, if you're locked to the image of God in a culture where science determines your perceptions of reality, how can you experience this ultimate ground that the shamans talk about?
The best example I know in our literature is that beautiful book by John Neihardt called Black Elk Speaks.
Black Elk was
a young Sioux, or Dakota as they're often called, boy around 9 years old. Before the American cavalry had encountered the Sioux, they were the great people of the plains. And this boy became sick. His psychologically sick. His family. I'm telling the typical shaman story. The child begins to tremble and is immobilized, and the family is terribly concerned about it. And they send for a shaman who had had the experience in his own youth to come as a psychoanalyst, you might say, and pull the youngster out of it. But instead of relieving him of the deities, he is adapting him to the deities, and the deities to himself, you might say. It's a different problem from that of psychoanalysis, where you remember, I think, who said, "Be careful lest in casting out your devil, you cast out the best thing that's in you." Here, the deities who have been encountered, the powers, let's call them, are retained. The connection is retained, it's not broken. And these men then become the spiritual advisors and gift givers of their people. Well, what happened with this young boy, he was about 9 years old, was he had a vision, and the vision is described, and it's a vision prophetic of the terrible future that his tribe was to have. But it also spoke of the possible positive aspects of it. It was a vision of what he called the hoop of his nation, realizing that it was one of many hoops, which is something that we haven't all learned well enough yet. And the cooperation of all the hoops of all the nations in grand procession and so forth. But more than that, it was an experience of himself as going through the realms of spiritual imagery that were of his culture and assimilating their import. And it comes to one great statement, which for me is a key statement to the understanding of myth and symbols. He said, "I saw myself on the central mountain of the world, the highest place. And I had a vision because I was seeing in a sacred manner of the world. Sacred central mountain was Harney Peak in South Dakota." And then he says, "But the central mountain is everywhere." That is a real mythological realization of life. It distinguishes between the local cult image, Harney Peak, and its connotation, the center of the world. The center of the world is the hub of the universe, Axis Mundi, the central pole star around which all revolve. The central point of the world is the point where stillness and movement are together. Movement is time, stillness is eternity, realizing the relationship of the temporal moment to the eternal, not moment, but forever, is the sense of life. Realizing how this moment in your life is actually a moment of eternity, and the experience of the eternal aspect of what you're doing in the temporal experience is the mythological experience, and he had it. So it's the central mountain of the world: Jerusalem, Rome, Benares, Lhasa, Mexico City. Mexico City, Jerusalem is symbolic of the spiritual principle at the center of the world.
So this little Indian was saying there is a shining point where all lines intersect.
That's exactly what he said.
He was saying God has no circumference.
God is an intelligible sphere, let's say a sphere known to the mind, not to the senses, whose center is everywhere and circumference nowhere. And the center, Bill, is right where you're sitting, and the other one is right where I'm sitting, and each of us is a manifestation